Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Weisberg. I am a managing attorney at Equip for Equality and the director of the Client Assistance Program. I'm really happy to be here today with my colleague, Emily Wilson. Emily is a staff attorney also at Equip for Equality, working in our special education clinic and a member of our CAP advocacy team. We're really pleased to be here to talk about talk today about self-advocacy strategies, something that we spend a whole lot of time thinking about and trying to help build skills here at Equip for Quality and at CAP. Before we get started, I wanted to pause to make sure that everyone has the accessibility needs that their access needs are being met. We have today 2 ASL interpreters and live CART captioning. If you're having any difficulty with either of those, please send a message either to Emily or myself, and we want to make sure everyone has communication and other types of access. The other housekeeping matter I wanted to let you all know is that today's presentation is being recorded and it will be posted to our CAP website with a number of other presentations that we've done over the last few months. And also after today's presentation, we'll be sending around a link to everyone who registered with a copy of our PowerPoint presentation. So please participate. Join us, and no need to take extensive notes. If that's not your thing, we'll be sending you a copy of the presentation. Okay, so let's get started. So as folks probably know, we at Equip for Equality are a legal services disability rights organization here in Illinois. We're part of a national network of similar organizations called the Protection and Advocacy System for the state of Illinois. This is sometimes referenced as the P&A system. Our mission at Equip for Equality is to advance the human and civil rights of people with disabilities. And we do that in a lot of ways, but first and foremost by providing free legal assistance or legal help to people with disabilities about issues related to their disability. We have several different legal teams. I myself am part of our civil rights team. Emily is part of our special education clinic. And we also have a group that's called the Independent Monitoring Unit that does monitoring for circumstances of abuse and neglect. And our contact information is on the slide, and our website is equipforequality.org. And we're here today as part of our role as the new Client Assistance Program, which is also called CAP. Hopefully some folks on today's presentation know what CAP is, but I'm really excited to tell you about it if you don't. So CAP is a program that was established by the Rehabilitation Act, which of course is a federal law that was passed by Congress in the 70s that provides non-discrimination and also services to people with disabilities. So what CAP does generally is it says, you know, if you're a person with a disability and you're getting services that are being provided under the Rehabilitation Act, we want to provide you with legal help, advocacy, and assistance to make sure that you're getting all of the services that you need. So what does that mean in practice? Well, there's 2 big programs in Illinois that are funded by the Rehabilitation Act. The first is vocational rehabilitation, also known as VR, also known as sometimes employment support services. And here in Illinois, that is run by our DRS, the Department or Division of Rehabilitation Services. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today might intertwine with some issues with VR at DRS. The other thing that CAP does, or the other thing that the Rehabilitation Act does, is provide funding for independent living services that are provided by CILS, or Centers for Independent Living. Also, another huge bucket of things that we do at CAP is that we can provide information, advice, assistance to people with disabilities who are getting those services about their employment rights under Title I of the ADA. And this all kind of makes sense, right? It's all tied together because the goal of the Rehabilitation Act is to foster independence and really ultimately help make sure that people with disabilities are working in competitive integrated settings and in meaningful employment opportunities. Okay, well, if you look at where CAPs are housed across the country, many of them are housed outside of the state government and inside the state P&A. So those organizations just like us at Equip for Equality. And starting last year, so almost a year, July 1st, 2022, CAP was redesignated from inside DRS to Equip for Equality. And so it's a relatively, it's an old program, but it's a newish program for us here at EFE. And so we're doing a number of these presentations to help really get the word out. So if this is the first time you're hearing about this and you're thinking, oh gosh, I need to tell everyone in my network, or I want to know more information, contact us. We can help give you brochures, we can give you more information, and whatever we can do to help you spread the word about our program, we would be very honored and happy to do. Okay, so with all of that aside, why are we here today? We are talking about one of my favorite topics, self-advocacy. And I want this to be, kind of in the spirit of self-advocacy. This isn't me and Emily telling you everything that we think. We want this to be collaborative as well. So I'm going to pause for a minute and I'm going to stop talking. And I would love for you to tell me, what does self-advocacy mean to you? And what you can do is you can write it in the chat and I will read some answers out loud. So the question again is, what does self-advocacy mean to you? We got one answer, which is asking for what you need. Excellent. That's an excellent answer. Anything else? Speaking for yourself. Absolutely. Standing up for your needs and your wants. These are all great. Anyone else? Taking responsibility. I love that. These are all fantastic answers. And, we did a little brainstorming in my legal team yesterday, thinking of what does self-advocacy mean to us? And these are very, very similar to the concepts that we came up with as well. And I don't know that there's one perfect definition, but, some things that I've heard of are helping yourself, the ability to communicate your needs in an effective way. I think, what do we need to do that? We need to understand our needs to be able to communicate them in an effective way, to be successful and able to participate. All really, really great ideas. So, when I think of the work that we do at Equip for Equality and at the CAP program, so much of what we do is to help foster people's ability to engage in self-advocacy. And you don't need us to do it. This is something that, people can do on their own. But we wanted to really spend the time to provide a framework to think through when we engage in self-advocacy, what are the steps that we should take? What are the things that we should think through? What are some strategies and what are some tips? But before we get there, I want to pause for a minute and say, many situations can be resolved with self-advocacy. I think sometimes you think, oh, I'm dealing with this issue, I need a lawyer. You don't always need a lawyer. And in some instances, having a lawyer isn't even the best way to go, right? Starting with just doing some own self-advocacy is really the way to go. So I'm going to pause for a second and I want to hear from you again. I'd love you to answer one of two questions. Either what are the benefits of self-advocacy, or what are some situations where you think self-advocacy might actually be the best way to solve a situation? We got great answers before. I know we can get some good ones again. Benefits, your needs are being met and heard. Self-esteem. Empowering yourself, right? Helping you to learn to use your voice. I love that answer. Come on, we as people with disabilities, advocating for ourselves is a lifelong mission, right? It's not like we have one situation that we're going to encounter once and never again. We got to build these skills because odds are we're going to need to use them. And how empowering is it? Exactly like people are saying, how empowering is it for us to take control of situations and be the driver in that change? And when the issue is not too difficult, is what someone said. We're going to talk today about knowing when self-advocacy is the right move and when it is self-advocacy to say, you know what, I think I need some help. We have a comment that self-advocacy can be beneficial in every setting. Absolutely agree. From my perspective as a lawyer, it is always a fantastic first step, right? There's in the CAP statute, there's actually a requirement that we at CAP resolve everything with the lowest level of intervention, meaning if something can be resolved with a phone call, we don't run into court, right? And that makes so much sense. And that's exactly what self-advocacy is. Let's resolve the situations we can resolve through talking, through planning, through goal setting. Another benefit is getting a need met, learning how to communicate with others. Fantastic. These are really excellent answers. Before we had the CAP program at EFE, we did a lot of work just advising employees about their rights. And I always think of, gosh, employment is a situation where self-advocacy is just almost always a better strategy, right? Because you're a person who has an ongoing relationship with a supervisor, coworker, boss, and being able to be the one to navigate those situations without a lawyer jumping in and potentially escalating the situation is going to be a better solution in the long run. And even though I've always thought that for employment, like you're absolutely right. I think Brianna, who mentioned this, self-advocacy can be really beneficial in every setting. I'm going to pause and see if Emily has any examples to add or any other comments on the self-advocacy piece.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. This is Emily. Just wanted to add, I fully agree. Working on the special education side, that's always the first thing that we start with families is kind of what tools and advice can we give to help you be a self-advocate and advocate for your child. So I think it's like being said in the chat, so beneficial in all settings. I think of kind of some examples of youth that have been really successful as a self-advocate and families that have been successful in helping their student advocate for themselves. I had a student who was in a transition program through their school and was just really struggling with figuring out kind of what they were capable of and what they wanted to do. And the student and the family were able to talk with their DRS counselor and kind of work through that scenario and explain kind of what the struggle was not just, they felt like the student was more capable and could do a lot more, but didn't know where to start. And in having that conversation with the counselor, they were able to advocate for a really comprehensive vocational evaluation for that student so they could figure out what they needed. Because I think a lot of times that's one of those big struggles with self-advocacy is where do we start, right? How do I know what to ask for? So I think that that's such a good example of figuring that out and being able to advocate for that process too.
This is Rachel. Thanks, Emily, for that tip and that story. So we're gonna give you 9 tips throughout today's discussion, and hopefully we can add in some stories throughout it and keep the conversation going. If a tip really resonates with you, throw it in the chat. Send a private message to us if you want about how you've either used that or you've seen someone not use that and how that's either been effective or not. So Emily will kick us off with step 1.
Rachel. So kind of just the main starting point, and this is something that, we try to reiterate a lot in our conversations with clients is that, you are important, right? This whole process is about you, whether we're talking about your employment services, your job, right? Your educational services, all of those things, you are important. Your needs matter, your preferences matter. And then it's important to remember too, that you know your needs better than anybody else. You know what's effective for you and what's not, what questions you have and what answers you can give. So just keeping that in mind at all times, that you are an important member, not just of the team, right? But this whole plan is about you. So we really want to keep that at the forefront and keep that in mind as you continue to advocate for yourself. So tip number 2, right, is when we think about preparing for self-advocacy. So getting ready to have these conversations, it's really helpful to name your goal, right? What are you actually trying to make happen? What is that outcome that you're trying to seek? And like that example that I gave a few minutes ago about self-advocacy, sometimes it's hard to figure out what that is, right? Sometimes we know what a problem is, but we don't know what that solution is that we need. So we really encourage you to think about it, right? Talk with your support team about what services, what supports, what goals you might have, and how those could be addressed. And then write it down, right? Before you have that conversation, name it, write it down, let it really be your guide. You know that sometimes these conversations can be really overwhelming. There can be a lot going on, a lot of people in the room, or just a lot to deal with at once. So being able to really make sure that you've got that focus and you know what you're looking for can be really helpful. And can be a helpful guide, whether it's having a piece of paper next to your computer while you do a virtual meeting or a phone call, right? Or bringing that with you to an in-person meeting as well. I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel for tip number 3.
This is Rachel. So as we're staying with our preparation, right? And I guess I want to pause and focus on, it is important to prepare for self-advocacy, right? We don't want to just jump in, start talking without thinking through these things. And that's part of the process and making us be better self-advocates. So along that and continuing on the preparation concept is tip number 3, which is we got to know what we know. So tip number 3 is do your research, get the information that you need to make an informed decision. And some questions that I know I ask myself and we should all be asking ourselves when engaging in self-advocacy is, what information do I know? What do I know for sure? And what don't I know? That is a really important question, right? Is our goal reasonable? What are the barriers to achieving our goal? And what might support our goal? So this is another area where CAP and Equip for Equality can help. So whether it's in the special ed context, the DRS context, the employment context, having a good understanding of what your rights are and where the law, how far the law can take you is really helpful because you're going to be a much more effective self-advocate if you go in asking for something that's reasonable, asking for something that's legally required. I've had situations where employees have, come to me and said, kind of after the fact, like I had a meeting with my employer and I insisted that it was a reasonable accommodation to have a change of a supervisor. And I'm so upset they didn't give me this change of supervisor and I want to file a complaint. And then we spent some time talking to this employee and said, the law actually says you probably don't have a right to a change of a supervisor, but you know what you do have a right to? Working with your supervisor to change the way that they're, having meetings with you or how they manage you. That could be a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. So, we have the situation where the person kind of went in, kind of like guns blazing about something that the law doesn't require, where that person would have been much more effective if they had taken their time to learn, okay, what is a reasonable accommodation in this situation, gone in and presented that. And that's something that sometimes you need to ask for help with, right? You need to say, okay, well, what is the VR regs allow in this situation, or what is possible in my transition plan? Do the research. And if you need help, we are here to help you and we want to help you. So don't hesitate to reach out under those circumstances. Well, I think we have said that we like planning. Well, guess what? Tip number 4 is plan, right? We really need to plan for our advocacy. And it's everything from what are we going to say to where are we going to say it to how are we going to say it. So starting with the where, in this day and age, we have a lot of options for how we engage in advocacy. Maybe it's saying, I think that this is a conversation that's going to be best through an in-person meeting. Maybe because of me and my disability related needs, that would be best. Maybe because, sometimes just being in a room with somebody, you're able to get more done. Maybe for whatever reason, a virtual meeting might be better, or a phone call, or a letter, or an email. But think about it. Don't just default to like how, I would be intentional and think about how you think you're going to be able to advocate for yourself the best. But of course, you want to balance that with how you think the information is going to be best understood. So, quick example, I have a client who is an employee who really, really does not like doing anything in any sort of like verbal communications, really prefers sending things by email. It's not for any disability related reason, just a personal preference. Well, that person's supervisor really doesn't like email. There are some inherent limitations, right? Tone sometimes can't be communicated. And so, when this client was trying to figure out how am I going to present this information, if it was 100% what the client would have been comfortable with, maybe it would have been an email. But in thinking through self-advocacy, it's like, how am I going to be best heard? And some of that is knowing and kind of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, like, what do I think for them? And so we talked through it and ultimately landed on, may not be the preference, but let's try to do a Zoom meeting. That way you still have your own space. You can keep notes everywhere that the person can't see. If you need to take a break, you can take a break. And that ended up being a great solution for this particular individual. We're all different, right? We all have individual needs, but it's an important thing to think through before you just jump in.
Rachel, I just wanted to add really quickly with that, with kind of those different meetings. I think that comes up a lot for families that I'm working with who are trying to deal with school teams. And sometimes it can be hard to find a time that's going to work for the school team and for you as a parent or the student to be able to really fully participate. But it's important to keep in mind that the school has to work with you. Right? They have to help you find a time that's going to work with you. So if your work schedule means that you can't do meetings in the afternoon, then they need to work with you to find a morning meeting. Or I've had students who really struggle with paying attention and want to be a participant in their own IEP meetings, but they struggle more in the mornings. So that means then we need to look at afternoon meeting time. So that's just something not only for you to plan for, but to know that you have a right to ask for that too.
Excellent. Thanks, Emily. And this is Rachel again. So sticking again on tip 4, again, more planning. Some strategies that we've seen be really effective, and this kind of combines a lot of these concepts, is before you start engaging in that self-advocacy, prepare an outline. Use bullet points about what you want to talk about. Put in bold the main point. You have identified what your goal is. Write down your goal. How are you going to explain it? How are you going to support it? Like, really think through, how am I going to support this? Do I have any documents? What's my argument? Do I need somebody else there to kind of help me? If I'm an employee, do I have a union member? If I'm an employee, do I have a job coach? Maybe in a meeting with VR, do I have a support person who's there as my, kind of to be there for my support? And really, kind of plan what you're going to say. And then practice. And I'm serious about this. We're as lawyers sometimes trained, before you go to court and make an oral argument, do it in the mirror. Practice what you're going to say, because the more you say it, the more natural it is and the more comfortable you're going to feel. And there's some people out there that are like self-advocacy, advocating for myself, like, I got this. I can sit down and I can do this. And there's other people that it just doesn't come as naturally. But I promise, if you say it out loud a few times before you're actually doing it, you're going to feel so much more comfortable on the actual day when you're going to do it. And this is, again, another time that we at CAP and Equip for Equality can help. We review people's outlines, we give people strategy ideas, again, just helping people be that leader and be their own best self-advocate. Another tip that I want to say here, and I think we're going to repeat it again, but I think it's really important, is that when you're preparing your outline and coming up with what you want to say and why you want to say it, kind of take a step back and think, how do I think this is going to be received? Okay. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. How do I think this is going to be received? And if it's not going to be received well, is there a different way to say it? Is there a different, explanation that you can give? And why do I think this other person is going to receive it in a different way? But really to kind of like think through the process. So I'm going to say this, what's going to happen next? And how am I going to react to that? sometimes just planning for those contingencies also gives you a lot more confidence that like, I know how I'm going to deal with this situation. Okay, moving on to step 5. Communicate as clearly as possible. So we've done the thinking, we found out our goal, we've done the planning, we've worked on our outline, we've come up with all the ideas, and now we got to do it. And guess what? You are prepared, you have planned, you have outlined, you have practiced out loud, you will do great. I have no doubt. So other tips, of course, if you're scheduling a meeting, you want to get off on the right foot, right? We want to be on time. We want to be polite. We want to be respectful. Sometimes we enter these situations with so much emotion and so much history, but it's important when you're being a self-advocate, as hard as it is, to really think through, starting today, I'm working to achieve my goal. Like, yes, all this stuff happened in the past, but I'm trying to be forward looking. I'm trying to solve problems, trying to look at things in the future. Sometimes you get into a meeting and it's really easy to get off track and other things come to your mind and you want to say what happened 3 years ago. Remember, you planned, you prepared, stick to the points that you had prepared before the meeting. Okay. Another important tip, and this is something we're going to spend some more time on, is to take notes. It's really helpful to know and have a record of what was discussed. And we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail. But very important, very, very, very important. Do not record any meeting without everyone's consent. Okay. There are different rules in different states about when you can record without consent. Here in Illinois, the rule is that you need consent, and it can be a criminal penalty if you don't get that consent and you record anyway. I cannot tell you how many employees come to me and say, I was discriminated against and I can prove it because I have it on recording. And, you can't use that because that was done without somebody's consent. So it's my lawyerly warning for everyone here today. Another
Rachel,
really, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Rachel. This is Emily. I just wanted to add into another point to that. Made me think about it with recordings. But if you do need language assistance, so if you need an interpreter in meetings to be able to effectively communicate, even if, I have a lot of families who communicate very well in English, but they really struggle with being able to comprehend information that comes really quickly because English is not their first language. So sometimes that interpreter just makes it easier to both feel comfortable and to also be able to communicate effectively. So if you need that that resource, to make sure to ask for that and be sure that that person is present and is effectively providing interpretation services.
That's such a great point. Thanks, Emily. And then the last point I wanted to make here, and I think this is another one that gives people a lot of comfort when you know this going in, is that you don't have to agree to anything on the spot. I think we have this assumption that we're going into this meeting to advocate and we're going to have to get this resolved today. That's not always the case, right? Especially if something is not extremely urgent. So I tell people all the time, go in, say your piece, listen, write it down, and ask to think about it. Ask for a couple days, ask for a week. And that's absolutely okay. And that, I think, can give you a lot of comfort that you're going to have time to go back, to process it, to think through the options and make an informed decision. Again, I feel like so much of this all comes back to making the best informed decision for you. Okay. Continuing on our advocacy, we've got tip number 6, which is a very lawyerly, it depends sort of tip, which is to be flexible sometimes. So here's what I mean by this. Yes, we have our goal. Yes, it is so important to stay true to our goal. But it's also important to have an open mind, right? It's important to remember that there might be a great idea out there that you didn't think of, or there might be an idea out there that's equally good that you didn't think of. Listen to the other side. I think a lot of times we go into a situation and think like it's our way. This is exactly what needs to be done. And I think that's a missed opportunity, both for your own self-advocacy and for just reaching a good resolution. I think sometimes you just want to make sure you're being creative, really focusing on solutions, and really staying open-minded and considering other ideas. So what I try to encourage businesses and employers when I'm doing trainings with them is to do the same thing, to not default to no, to think about things, to consider other ideas. And I feel like it's only fair if I'm asking that of an employer or a business or a school district for us to kind of like walk the walk too, right? For us to also be open-minded and consider other ideas. That doesn't mean we need to agree to them. It doesn't mean that they're good ideas. But if they're not good ideas, instead of just saying no, in my mind, it's helpful to give a reason. Thank you for that idea. I appreciate the creative thinking. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to work for me because XYZ. And the because is really helpful because because helps us get to yes, right? Because maybe that idea wouldn't work, but that enables us to continue talking. How can we tweak that idea to make it one that's going to work for both parties? So I would not, no defaulting to no, being flexible sometimes. That doesn't mean you give up on your goals, right? That doesn't mean that you go into a meeting, the person says, no, let's do this. And you say, okay, I'm being flexible, but consider it. Think about whether it actually would be a good idea for you. Okay. Tip number 7, and this is kind of what we were talking about before, right? Trying to understand the other side. Again, with the goal of getting to yes, the goal of working to find a solution. I think the best way to understand the other side, and I say the other side in quotes because it's not always a yes, us versus them, right? Like we can work very collaboratively as a VR customer and a VR counselor working for the same issue. So I don't mean to say we're opposed to each other, but just two people in a conversation. So how do we get information? I think the best way is to ask questions, and that is okay, right? Because then we're accepting with the information that's being shared, but we're asking so that we can dig deeper. So a couple examples I have here. Employment. Maybe somebody asks to work the second shift as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA because of their disability. They're told no. Okay, so sit down with a meeting, you sit down with HR, you sit down with the supervisor to talk about it, and you say something like, I understand that you're not able to let me work the second shift instead of the first. Can you help me understand why? It's an important phrase. I understand. Can you help me understand why? That might help us work together to find a solution. Again, we're being problem solving focused. I'm understanding where the other side is coming from, and I am committed to working together to find a solution here. Another example, DRS Voc Rehab Services. I'm disappointed that my request for this super awesome music school was not approved. What was your reasoning? Can you tell me about it, right? We don't just say no and say it's not going to happen and walk away. We do a little digging. We do a little research. We understand the other side with an eye towards finding a solution that's going to work for both of us. Emily, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any special ed examples, transition examples?
Yes, you actually read my mind. So thank you, Rachel. This is Emily. So just wanted to, I think an example that I've seen a lot is with staffing. So recognizing that sometimes the issue why school is not providing services is a staffing issue. And that doesn't mean your child is not entitled to those services ultimately. But it means that sometimes we have to get creative and we think about things. So if, the student is supposed to be in kind of doing more vocational opportunities, but right now the staff is short, they don't have enough job coaches to provide that right now, then how do we build that into their IEP, into their plan moving forward, or so that they get additional supports later on? Right. So if we know someone's going to be hired in a month, right, maybe they get double the amount of time when that month comes around and that additional person is present. So thinking through, like Rachel said, right, what are some of those solutions we can figure out when we're looking at both sides of the situation? Thanks, Rachel.
And this is Rachel again. So tip number 8, and with apologies, this is where I'm wearing my lawyer hat. Keep records of the good and the bad. Why? Well, it can be helpful to have things written down, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean like, I don't believe you and I'm memorializing this. Like, it doesn't have to mean that. It's just like taking notes. I'll be in a meeting and 2 months from now, I have zero idea of what happened to that meeting because I can't remember that far back. Well, it's the same thing when you're engaging in self-advocacy or having a meeting with somebody. It's just keeping notes of what happened so that you have a good record and you remember what happened. Even those of us who think they have great people, I do not think I have a great memory. People who do think they have a great memory, you still can't remember this level of detail. And so it is just important to jot down kind of what happened. Of course, from a legal perspective, having that information written down is really helpful if later you want to file a complaint or do an appeal. It's helpful to have that information written down. And again, from a legal perspective, having something written down at the time that it happened, we call it like contemporaneous written notes, is helpful, right? Because it's not relying on memories, which can fade or change over time, but it's contemporaneously written. And so it kind of has more credibility when it's being offered in pursuant to like a more formal advocacy action. Okay, so that's the why. Here's the what. And the how. So, a great way to memorialize or record something that happened in a meeting. I mean, one is you can just kind of like write notes to yourself, but another is just to do a quick follow-up. And it doesn't have to be confrontational or adversarial. It can be really, nice and just like a recap. So you can have a meeting, maybe you're having a meeting with your VR counselor, or you're meeting with your supervisor, and you just send a follow-up of, a thank you, thank you for meeting with me about my request for accommodations, or thank you for taking the time to discuss my IPE goals. During this conversation, you said X, Y, and Z. I was appreciated hearing that and look forward to continuing to work with you, right? We stay positive, we stay solution oriented, but we have those things written down. So if there's a dispute later on, you can say, wait a second, I thought we already resolved this. And here it is. Here's the email that I sent you. And like that just really helps advocacy kind of move along. We are in the final touches of some fact sheets for CAP specifically, and we have one on best practices for meetings and on documentation. So those will soon be up on our website, and it'll have kind of like the reason and the how, and then it also has a worksheet that you can use to actually like fill out who did I talk to, when did I talk to, and all of that information, which is a helpful template to use. And you'll be able to access that on our website, which is equipforequality.org/CAP.
Rachel, I just wanted to chime in. Somebody put in the question, would it be beneficial to send an email summary of what was discussed or just keep it for your records? And I think absolutely. And just like Rachel was talking about, you can do that as a thank you note, as a thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Here's a summary of what I understand we discussed. So that's a really great way to do it. And then I also just wanted to add, if you have a student who's in transition, if they're still in school, one way to do this with an IEP is there's supposed to be a notes section. So somebody's supposed to be taking notes throughout the meeting and documenting everything. Sometimes those are really, really detailed, and they'll say exactly who said what and when, and it's great. And then sometimes they're pretty vague, right? And it might just say, parent agreed, right? So it might be a good place to you can write a letter, right, and ask that it be attached to your child's IEP with your thoughts from the meeting. So if you had concerns, if there were things that you agreed with, that you want to make sure that it's really clear that that needs to happen, you can put that in writing and ask that to be attached to their IEP as well.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks for that great question. Staying on the topic of keeping records, in addition to memorializing or keeping records of conversations and meetings, you can also just keep records of like things that happen that seem important. So, again, wearing my employment hat, this is usually like if you feel like you're being discriminated against at work, one option is to start keeping records. And I would advise folks in that situation, anytime you think you're being treated differently or unfairly because of a disability, jot it down, right? And include enough details that it makes sense later on. So the time, the date, the location, names of people who were part of the conversation or who witnessed it, and details of the conversation. I mean, if you remember something like absolutely, verbatim what they said, put it in quotes. If not, you can do a summary of what somebody said. But those are good things, especially like in an employment discrimination situation that you want to keep documented and you want to do it in a contemporaneous way. It's also good to keep records, right? So like if you're getting an important email, letter, policy, memo, I mean, especially when you're getting involved in your In your DRS case, you know, you want to keep all of those important documents. What medical documentation did you give to your counselor? What does your IPE say? What are the emails back and forth between you and your counselor? You know, keep all of that in a specific place. And so if you need to kind of go back and figure things out, like it's all there, right? And you have all of that information. And then again, as I mentioned, we are soon to be publishing a fact sheet and a worksheet that hopefully will be a nice tool for you all.
Rachel, if I can just add to that too, in addition to the employment side of things and keeping track, I think that's also important with school. So if you have concerns, or if you're a child, or if you're a student who's on this call, right, if you have concerns that maybe you're not getting the services you need, or you're not getting along with your paraprofessional or your job coach, right, or anybody that you're working with, that you're keeping track of that as well. And like Rachel said, right, the time, the date, who you were talking to, what happened or what didn't happen, and then being able to use that moving forward is really helpful.
And this is Rachel again. So how to document? Obviously, there's not one size fits all, right? We need to do with what's going to actually work for us, with the goal of having it be something that's easy, that's all in one place, and that you won't lose. Kind of the main goals. So lots of different options out there. I've had some clients that have had just like a journal, like a hard copy journal that they kind of keep with them. And it's like there's discrimination journal. Like the only thing in there is their notes of their workplace situations. I've heard other people that just already have a calendar or a planner and just add it to that. I know some people who will do it on like a cell phone or on their computer. Just remember, you never want to use someone else's technology. Like if you're an employee and you have your employer's laptop, don't use that. And of course, if you are using technology, remember to back it up, because we don't want to lose it one day and never have any information. And then again, of course, never record anything without permission. Okay. Self-advocacy tip number 9 is that being a self-advocate does not mean you are a solo advocate, right? It does not mean that you are doing this by yourself or that you're doing this in isolation. Being a good self-advocate is knowing when to ask for help and asking for that help. You know, I know a lot of us have our support systems, and I just want to reemphasize again that this is kind of what CAP is here for. It's what EFE is here for in a lot of instances. And so again, with the CAP focus, anything that's a DRS vocational rehabilitation situation, transition issue, employment rights questions for DVR customers, interactions with centers for independent living, we can talk, you know, no question is too small. So we are happy to talk you through this, give you strategies, look at outlines, anything we can do to help, you know, kind of help you in this situation. But there's also a time when self-advocacy isn't going to work. And that was a comment made by, I can't remember, someone earlier said, you know, it works when it works, right? So there are going to be times when you can be the best self-advocate in the world and you have done everything right, but it still doesn't work. You know, and guess what? That happens to us too. You know, there's times where we think we're being the best lawyer in the world and we're sending this like letter that we think is going to change everything. And like, it's not. And you have to escalate a situation in certain circumstances. So we just wanted to quickly kind of go over what that looks like in these kind of like these 3 different buckets of contexts. So if you need to escalate something in the DRS voc rehab system, you know, you've got a number of different options, right? You can keep working with your counselor, kind of continuing to push, continuing to ask those questions. You can ask to talk to your counselor supervisor. Sometimes the supervisor is able to work things out informally. You can appeal a decision. And then once you decide you want to appeal, there's an option for something called an informal resolution conference, where you can kind of talk through things more formally. There's a mediation, there's a hearing. All of these have different pros and cons, and there's different situations where some of them are better. We at CAP are happy to talk you through all of those different options, and in many circumstances are able to provide you with rep in certain circumstances. Okay, in the employment world, what does escalation look like? So you're facing a situation at work, you're doing the best self-advocacy you can do, things aren't going well. What are your options there? Well, again, you can kind of just like keep on keeping on, keep doing your job and hope things change. You could start documenting, keeping records, right? So that way you're like doing something proactive. You could talk or complain to someone internally, like a manager, human resources, or you can say, I'm going to file a complaint, a charge of discrimination with a federal agency or a state agency, the EEOC or IDHR. You have to do that within 300 days. And of course, there are lawyers out there that help with employment situations, right? So you can contact a lawyer, including CAP and Equip for Equality.
This is Emily. So thinking about kind of in the special education transition realm, right? If your self-advocacy is not working, right? There are options there too. So kind of the first one, and this is the one that we always recommend families start with, is requesting an IEP meeting. So maybe things with school are not working and you've been in conversation with your child's teacher, or your child has really tried to talk with their teacher and it's not been effective. You can request an IEP meeting at any time. Right? School has to do a meeting once a year, but you can request one at any time to talk about making changes, right? Or addressing any concerns that you have for you and your child. Now, sometimes that doesn't work, right? Sometimes you need to bring somebody to that meeting with you, right? Whether it's an attorney or an advocate, that's another form that you can use to escalate things if it comes to that. Another option too is to request an independent educational evaluation, or an IEE. So this is something, at any point in time, if you disagree with the school district, you could go out and get an independent evaluation of your child, and the school has to consider it. But in this circumstance, we're talking about asking the school to pay for it, because sometimes those evaluations are pretty expensive. So that's one option, that you could ask the school to pay for it. Now, I will say, if the school says that they don't want to pay for it, right, they have to file for due process. So that can get a little bit more hostile than you might expect pretty quickly. So that's just something to keep in mind. Other options, if you're not able to resolve things at the IEP meeting, and you can go to mediation. So you can request mediation through the Illinois State Board of Education, and it's a neutral third party who's coming to that meeting and is trying to help you in the school district reach a resolution. Right? Can we work this out? Can we reach an agreement that everybody agrees with? And it's a binding agreement that's enforceable in court if you're able to reach that. And that's a completely free and voluntary process. Another option is to request a due process hearing. And this is really one of the highest things that you can do. Right? Because it's like a small trial. You and the school district would be putting on witnesses and presenting evidence, and there's a hearing officer who's going to listen to that and make a ruling that's binding on everyone. So that's definitely an option if you feel like you need to get to that point, but just want to highlight too that that's a longer process, and one that we would not recommend that families do without an attorney. You can also file an administrative state complaint. So you could file a complaint with the Illinois State Board of Education saying, my student is not getting these services or these supports that they need. They come and investigate the situation, and ISB will investigate and issue findings and remedies if they find it appropriate. So with all of this, if you feel like you've gotten to that point where that self-advocacy is just not working, right, and you're not able to be effective, please call us. Right? Because at a minimum, we're going to help you talk through what strategy might be the best next step. And I saw in the chat somebody asking if EFEA does go to these meetings and provides educational advocacy. We do, right? So we're not able to do it in all cases. And like Rachel talked about earlier, we try to do that self-advocacy piece first. So we're definitely going to ask you what steps you've taken, or how we can advise you to take steps on your own first. But we try to go to those IEP meetings as much as possible as well, and provide that representation. So we'll definitely look at your case and see what we can do. So just a recap of all of these tips, because we've been through so much information. So tip number one, remember that you're important. Right? And that's number one for a reason, right? This is about you, and we want to make sure that it continues to serve your interests, right? That you're getting what you need out of these services and supports, and really able to reach your goals moving forward. And then tip number two, name your goal, right? When we go and have these conversations, when you're advocating for yourself or advocating for your child, it's important to know what you're asking for, right? So we can really make sure that happens. Tip number three, do your research. Right? Get the information that you need to make an informed decision. Right? It can be really difficult to have these conversations, and if somebody asks a question you're not really sure, right? We want to make sure that you have that answer as much as possible, or know where to find it, so that you can be prepared. Tip number four, plan, right? As Rachel said, we really like this. The more prepared that you are for these conversations, really, we think that leads to better outcomes, but it also makes it a more comfortable conversation, right? You can be much more confident when you have that plan and you've thought through what you want to say, how they might respond, right? And what you're going to do next. Tip number 5, communicate as clearly as possible, right? That plan and thinking through those things, having this conversation, talking through your plan with somebody else, right? All of those things to really make it so that you're able to communicate effectively, and thinking through what supports you might need to do that as well. Tip number 6, be flexible sometimes. So think about those creative solutions, right? It may not be the solution that you had in mind, but it might meet your needs. But at the same time, it's okay to say no if it doesn't, right? We want to be creative, we want to be flexible and work with people to reach a solution. But if it's not actually a solution for you, you don't have to agree to it. And then 7, I think I kind of combine these here, but try to understand the other side, right? When we're thinking about finding a solution, maybe there are some things going on that we don't know, that we don't fully understand. Doesn't change what your right is to receive services, but it might change what that solution looks like, right? And how we can work together and collaborate. Tip number 8, keep records, right? The very attorney advice, right? Everything, document it all, right? Put it in writing as much as possible. And then tip number 9, and I think this is another one that's so critical, right? You're not alone. We are here to help. We want to help. We don't just say that, we really do mean that. So please contact us. Like Rachel said, there's no question too small. Even if it's just that you want to run by your plan with us, right? That's something that we can help you do, and are happy to do as well. So I know we started this with so many great inputs in the chat, so many good suggestions and answers. So if you have any other tips, kind of recognize that a lot of people have been at this for a while. So if you have any tips or questions, please do put them in the chat or in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you.
This is Rachel. I'll pause for a second to see. We have a couple hypos to walk through, which we can do too, and then revisit. But we would love to always update this presentation, right? And we were thinking of taking this presentation and putting it into some sort of like worksheet or fact sheet as well. So if you've got a great tip that we missed, or you want to add a story, we would love to include it. So please fill it in. Well, thanks, Tammy. Some very organized and clear suggestions. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's dig in and do a couple hypos, but if you have anything to add, you have until the rest of the webinar to add it, or you can contact us after. Okay, so let's practice. We've got Julia. Julia is a new DRS customer. She is eager to start working. So she asks her DRS counselor for assistive technology for her computer. Julia's VR counselor is very kind and responsive during their early conversations and told Julia it would be no problem. But now some time has gone by. Julia has not received anything in writing. Oops, I forgot a knot there. But Julia has not received anything in writing and has not yet gotten her IPE or the technology. What should Julia do? What should Julia not do? Feel free to write in the chat. I'll get us started. So some of the things that I was thinking in this situation is that it's so easy to make kind of assumptions, right? So I know if I was Julia and I've been in this situation, I'm just kind of freaking out, right? Like, I really want to start. She said I can do it. Why haven't I heard from her? And it's very easy to kind of like jump to 100, right? Of like, she must have decided that the assistive technology isn't going to be provided. I'm never going to be able to go to school, or never going to be able to go to work. But we need to kind of scale back, right? And think about it from the VR counselor's perspective. Maybe she was out of the office for a little bit. Maybe there was something else going on. We have a great suggestion of contact for follow-up regarding the conversation. Excellent, Jeremy. It's an excellent first step. And I think to do it in a way that isn't accusatory, right? It's not like I haven't heard from you. It's like hey, I'm just reaching out to check in. I was really excited about our conversation. And so we got another great one. Contact your DRS counselor for an update. Ask for an evaluation from the Illinois Assistive Technology Project. Absolutely, that would be a good one as well. Kind of expanding your circle, right? Expanding your bubble and expanding your resources. Anyone have an idea of what Julia could have done to maybe make her feel less nervous at this point? Like, what could she have done after she had that initial conversation? Ask for a time frame. I love that. Yeah, that helps us make informed decisions, right? And it helps monitor our expectations. Thank you for this meeting. It was really wonderful to meet with you. When might I expect to have this in writing? Follow up to clarify expectations. Absolutely, a really, really good one. The other one that came to my mind, again, keeping my lawyer hat on, is like following up and memorializing that conversation, right? So you have something in writing saying, it's great to meet with you. I'm so excited to get to work. During our meeting, you said it would be no problem for me to get this assistive technology. I can't wait to make that happen. For me, when I had to advocate for myself in school, it helped to know that you will get through it. Generally, situations get better. Yeah, absolutely. It's sometimes you enter these situations and you think, how is this going to get resolved? But like, it will. You have support. You have a great VR counselor. It's going to get resolved. We have a couple more, but I want to make sure. I'm going to skip to Emily's. So I'm on Lily. So we'll do this one, and then we have a couple resources for y'all at the end, including our CAP contact information.
Thanks, Rachel. This is Emily. So Lily is a 20-year-old student in her district's transition program. And her program is focused on independent living skills, but she really wants to work. And she's frustrated that she's not developing skills for work. She also has a job opportunity to work in the community on the weekends, but to start the job, she's going to need a job coach. And her school has told her that they can't provide a job coach on the weekends. And DRS is telling her that they can't provide services while she's still in school. So there are a couple different issues here. So what steps do you think Lily and her family could take in this situation?
And Emily, just for time purposes, you may want to answer your own question.
Yes, so I can go and jump in, and if you have thoughts in the chat, please add them. So thinking about school, right? When she's frustrated with her program, I think the first step would be requesting an IEP meeting, right? Talk with the school team, because it might be that there's a misunderstanding here, and we can clear this up. And I see an example or an answer in the chat. Invite the DRS counselor to the IEP meeting to discuss transition. Absolutely, right? Put everybody in the same room so we have a conversation and we can clarify who's going to do what, right? This comes up a lot in transition issues, and it's a great way to self-advocate, is to make sure you've got all the right people in the room, and you're asking those questions and asking for those services and supports you need. So that's great. And then I would just say, if those answers continue to be no, this is a good example of where self-advocacy might be asking for help, right? And reaching out to us.
So we'll send you this information when we distribute the PowerPoint, but we do have a couple new EFE programs that we wanted folks to know about. I'm just going to highlight one is that we are doing free training on seminars about the new cannabis legalization law and how to expunge your cannabis criminal records. If that's something that you or folks you work with would be interested, please reach out to Barry Taylor at barryt@equipforequality.org. We have an employment rights helpline. We have a special ed clinic. I think we have exhausted the employment and the special ed information during today's presentation. So I just want to wrap up with thank you for participating today. As I mentioned, we'll send you the slides. We'll send you a link to the recording. And here is our CAP contact information. So, any way you contact Equip for Equality, you can get in touch with us, but it's equipforequality.org/CAP is our website address. Emily and I will stick around for a moment if anyone has any final thoughts or questions for us? Otherwise, thank you all for your participation today and allowing us to learn together, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.